friends, welcome back to my channel. We're here today to talk a little bit about the books that I read in March 2023. Most of the books that I read were for the BookTube Prize. I also read some books that were for middle grade audience because I was participating in middle grade March, or at least I intended to participate in middle grade March a lot more than I did. But I read some books. So let's just put all the book talk for March in one place. I wasn't sure that I should make a separate video with a March recap just because I already made a video where I talked about a lot of the books that I read for the BookTube Prize. But just in case you don't watch that video, here's all the books that I read in March in one place. So I don't have all the books anymore because a lot of the books that I read came from the library, and I'm supposed to be reading more of the books that I already own, books from my shelf. That project is not going so well. So at some point in the near future, I need to start doing a check-in on my goals for 2023. I'm not anticipating that calculation just because that's not going well. But most of the books that I read, or all of the books that I read, most of the books that I read in March were from the library. So the first book that I read was James and the Giant Peach by Roald Dahl, and I like that a lot. Kids book, middle grade book, and it's about a boy who has lost his parents, and he's been sent to live with relatives who do not really dote on him. They don't really care about him. They're abusive, or at least the language suggests they're abusive. Roald Dahl's writing is a little bit about a fantasy, and so you know how in kids' books the kids have to be separated from the adults so the kids can do what they would do. You know, there's a thing that parents do or adults do, and I didn't realize it until I became a parent myself, but we don't really think that kids can do a lot of the things that they do prove that they can do. I know when I was a child I thought that, man, if I could just get the opportunity to prove myself. And then you kind of grow up and you realize you don't know as much. But you can definitely do things as a child. And I think in children's literature, that's something that we learn to see, we learn to appreciate. That kids sometimes need an opportunity to prove to themselves and to prove to the rest of the world that they can. No, scratch that. Kids need an opportunity to prove to the world that they can do all the things that they already know that they can do. And I'm really trying to do that with my daughter, because I don't want her to need to be away from me in order to be herself. I want her to be herself with me around. So I'm giving her opportunities to demonstrate her abilities. So James and the Giant Peach. Really like that book because James proves his wit. He proves his intelligence. He proves that he can take things that he learned in one place and apply them. So not just knowledge that you regurgitate, not just, you know, things that you have heard and you can repeat, but that you can apply knowledge. Like, that is the mark of intelligence. And so James gets an opportunity when this giant peach comes into his life, and he gets to travel and meet new people and to be a leader, to do things and to show that he can do things. And I love the story. Love the story. So that was the first book that I read in March, and it was a middle grade book, and it had a fantastic storyline, moral, whatever, however you call that. Then I read Go Tell It on the Mountain by James Baldwin, which was about another little boy, well, not so little, on the cusp of turning a teenager. Is he turning 14, I think, 13 to 14? In any case, it's a little bit about his life with his family, his mother, his adopted or stepfather, and the other adults in his life. So his stepfather's sister and their life before the stepfather married his mom, and his brother, who's supposed to be the favored son of the family, but who is very resentful of things about his dad and all of that. And the parents are very religious. And so this boy, gosh, what's his name now? John. His name is John. A lot of the characters in Go Tell It on the Mountain have biblical names. So there's John and there's Gabriel, and yeah. The story is set in Harlem in the mid-1900s, and it's about this boy and the religious people in his life, and a little bit about their lives before they became these people who were sold out to religion. So the things that they did in their youth, and how sometimes they're trying to shield the new generation of teenagers from the mistakes that they made while they were kind of tiptoeing in and out of the church. So I loved Go Tell It on the Mountain. I thought it was a fantastic debut from James Baldwin. Like, it's the kind of book that when you read it, you just know that the author is going to go on to write some incredible things. And so I loved it. Go Tell It on the Mountain by James Baldwin. It was my second book that I read in March. Then I read Bridge to Terabithia by Catherine Patterson, another middle grade book. And this one was a little bit different because for a big part of the book, I was just reading and it felt like it was kind of normal. It's a normal story about a boy and the kid who moves in next door, and the friendship that starts and outlives the rivalry that could occur between them because they both have these shared or similar desires. And when both people want to be the best at something, one or both of them have to compromise in some way, but the friendship is the thing that endures. And so it's about these two kids being friends, and then something terrible happens, and it's about how one of the children processes how they use the lessons from that friendship to go on. It's a different kind of story. It's a different kind of story, but one that had like a really big impact. It's a kind of story that I feel like you never forget. You mightn't remember all the details about the book, but there's something about the story that you'll just never forget. And so yeah, I'm really happy that I read Bridge to Terabithia, Catherine Patterson. I highly recommend that you check that one out too. So then most of the books that I read after that were just like book 2 prize reading. So I read Dinners with Ruth, memoir on the power of friendships by Nina Tottenberg, who is from NPR. You may know her from NPR. You may also know her because her father was a famous violinist and he was performing into his 90s. And Tottenberg was also really good friends with Ruth Bader Ginsburg. You may know Ruth Bader Ginsburg from her time on the Supreme Court bench. She was the second woman to have been nominated to the bench, or the second woman to have served on the bench. And her relationship with Nina Tottenberg spanned almost 50 years. So they were friends when Tottenberg was a court reporter for the Supreme Court and trying to understand some of the legal ramifications of what she was hearing and having to write about and wanting to understand it a little bit better. And she reached out to RBG. And so they became friends, and RBG kind of guided her into understanding some things about the Supreme Court before RBG became a Supreme Court justice. So I really like that. I really enjoyed the book. A lot about friendship and a lot about friendship. Lots of different kinds of friends. Tottenberg herself was married, and then she lost her husband and she was remarried. And with both of her spouses, she talks about the close-knit fellowship of spouses being friends, and what sometimes when you're friends with a couple, you have different kinds of connections with the two people. So Tottenberg and her second husband is a doctor, and he wasn't RBG's primary care physician, but Ruth would consult with him. Even though she's friends with Nina, Nina's husband would talk with Ruth about her medical concerns, and they wouldn't share that because friendship. I really like this book. So you'll hear me chat a little bit more about that when I talk about the books that I read for the Book 2 Prize. Then I read Stay True by Washu, and I really, really like this book. I'm sorry that it wasn't higher in my rankings because I really, really like this book. But I had some really good books in this round. So This is kind of written like it's a zine because the author is talking a little bit about life in the 90s, going to college in the 90s, and being really passionate about music and the music industry, and producing little magazines about his life and his work and his passion and his interests. And so this book is a little bit off. I think the word that I used, or the phrase that I used in my recap video, is time capsule. This book is kind of a time capsule from the 90s. A lot of the things that we were interested in and learning about, learning to get immersed in from the 90s, they're very present in this book. So we're reading about college in the 90s and what it meant to be a teenager or a person in your young early 20s, and the freedom and the carefree life in a lot of ways. The things that people were interested in and concerned about, like music, Kurt Cobain, and Smells Like Teen Spirit, and people learning about email and taking pictures with film cameras. And so you don't have a lot of pictures like now. Like now we have pictures every few minutes. We take a picture. It's also a little bit about grief, because there's a very significant relationship that develops. And you can see the development of the relationship on these pages as Washu mentions, just like conversations that he has with this person. And after this person is gone out of his life, like you can kind of see him, you can almost see him revisiting those conversations, and people asking him like, were you guys really that close? And him having to kind of prove to himself, yes, this thing was not just significant because I lost it. So it's a little bit of an experience of grief, surrounded by all the other things that a person would mourn when it's lost, like youth and the beauty of the 90s. So really enjoy that, and you'll hear me chat a little bit more about it in the other video. Then I read In Love by Amy Bloom, another memoir, a memoir of love and loss. This one's about a woman whose husband was diagnosed with early onset Alzheimer's, and about the relationship that they had and the relationship that she lost because of her husband's battle with Alzheimer's. I love the love story here because Amy Bloom, I think she tries to be very real in her presentation of her husband. She doesn't just canonize him. She doesn't just talk about his good points. She focuses on his good points, but she also talks about the hardship of being a caregiver to someone who there's a point where they don't want care, or they don't believe that they need care, or they're just past the point of caring, whether caring what you do, or what their caregiver does. So it's a very emotional read, and there's some very difficult choices that are made here. And Amy Bloom talks about what it means to love someone and not necessarily want the same thing that they want, but want to give them what they want. So read that, BookTube prize. All those are BookTube prize. Also read Solito by Javier Zamora, which is about a boy, a 9 to 10-year-old boy, who takes a trip from El Salvador to the United States of America to reconnect with his parents. And he travels solo, almost. I mean, he's 9. And so they're crossing the border. Between Mexico and the United States, but he's also coming from El Salvador, so he has to travel through Guatemala, then into Mexico, through Mexico, and then into the United States. And it's about the experience of that trip, trying to cross the border, what that's like, all the things that can happen to a boy traveling alone. So the people who he has to leave behind, the people who he has to separate from in order to make this trip, the people to whom his care is entrusted, and whether those people always have his best interests at heart, or are they looking out for themselves, that kind of thing. So there's a lot in this book, big book, almost 400 pages of text, but so well worth the read. So another BookTube prize candidate. I don't know which one of these books will make it through to the next round, but you watch my videos, you'll see what my choices were. And then another big book, Buster Keaton, Filmmaker's Life by James Curtis. Buster Keaton, performer, performed with his family as a child, grew up to be or continued to be an actor and a filmmaker, director. Just his impact on the cinematic world. And yeah, so this is another big book, almost 700 pages of text. Also read Willa Cather's Death Comes for the Archbishop. Buddy read this with Patrice, and I love this. Willa Cather just kind of immerses into religious life in Mexico during the 1800s, and we're reading about French bishop and his friend. They're both working as clergy in New Mexico, and the experience of the landscape and the people and what it's like when someone comes from elsewhere and is trying to evangelize or trying to be a missionary to people who don't always feel the need for that kind of intervention. But there's a lot about this and a lot about the history and the people that they meet, and some of the facts that are recorded here, a lot of the facts that are recorded here are historical. So I really enjoyed learning a little bit about the art and the history and the culture as it's enmeshed in this story. So yeah. I also read The Elegance of the Hedgehog by Muriel Barbary, translated from the French by Alison Anderson, and everybody read this with Rosalie and Columbus. This is a reread for me. I still love the book. It's one of those quiet books. For most of the book, it's a little bit about reflecting on class and social hierarchy and how you see yourself, because how you see yourself is not always how the rest of the world sees you, but how you see yourself also impacts how you see others. And so a lot about life in this hotel in France, in Paris, and we're reading about the middle-aged concierge and one of the girls who lives in the residential hotel. So one of the rich people's daughter, that's her on the front, and the concierge, who's a very big fan of art and culture, and a little bit of their meeting of minds and the similarities between two very different kind of women, two very different kinds of people. So I love that. I love that book. It's quiet for the most part. There's a lot about history and culture and art and sociology that you can just kind of center on. And so yeah, it also makes me really want to go read Anna Karenina. So yeah, there's that. I also read The God of Good Looks by Brianne McIver, which was a NetGalley download. And this one is set in Trinidad and Tobago. It's about a young woman who left Trinidad to go overseas to study and returns home. And when she returns, she's a little isolated. She doesn't have a lot of close friends from her youth. Her mother has died and her father has moved on. So she feels a little isolated, and she gets wrapped up in a relationship with an older married man who's a politician and has a lot of influence, and ergo his wife has a lot of influence. So when the relationship goes south, she also loses everything that relationship provided for her. And it's a little bit about her starting over and learning how to trust other people, getting a new job and getting new social engagement, but also how the losses have kind of impacted her. You know, how other people see you can affect you. Really like this book, really like the writing. It was a NetGalley download. I'm not sure if anything is going to change in the final version, but Brianne McIver is a Trinidadian author, so I want to support her. So when the book is released to the public, I'm going to get a copy and reread it, and I'll tell you more about it then. And then I think one more book. I also read The Bone Readers by Jacob Ross, which was the selection for the RunwrightReads book club in March. And I'll make a separate video where I chat a little bit more about this book. So for now, I'll just say it's a little bit of crime fiction set in a fictional Grenada. And we're reading about a man who joins the police force as a job. He has some other things. He wants to use his contacts in the police department in order to solve a crime that was committed against his mother. And it's a little bit about his non-traditional policing. So more on that in a separate video. But yeah, those are the books that I read in March. And I hope you come back to hear a little bit more about my reading in April. Let me know in the comments down below what was your best book that you finished in March. So yeah, thank you so much for watching this one. And until we come back for another video, happy reading. Bye.